Riverside Hills, New Jersey, is a picture-perfect suburban neighborhood. The streets are lined with neat rows of houses, each with its own manicured lawn and pristine white fences. Children's laughter echoes in the distance, filling the air with an innocent charm that seems to promise tranquility. The sun shines brightly, casting a warm, golden glow over everything, from the blooming flower beds to the neatly trimmed hedges. It's the kind of place where everything appears to be just right, a place where families can live out their idealized American dream. Lena, a 30-year-old elementary school teacher, stands in front of the window in her cozy living room, gazing out at the scene before her. She takes a deep breath, feeling the weight of the day's exhaustion settle into her bones. Her home is calm, peaceful, a place she's always imagined would be the foundation of a happy life. She shares it with Daniel, her 35-year-old husband, who, on the outside, is everything she could have ever wanted: handsome, successful, and affectionate. They've been together for years, building a life full of laughter, shared dreams, and plans for the future. But something has been off lately. A subtle shift she can't quite put her finger on. Daniel has always been attentive, always present, but for the past few months, there's been an unease she can't shake. His late nights at work have become more frequent, his absences less explained, his mood darker. The sparkle in his eyes, the warmth in his smile, has been slowly fading, replaced with a distant look, one that Lena finds herself staring at more and more. He's not the man he once was, or at least, not the man she thought he was. As she stands there, the warm light from the setting sun bathing the room in a soft, amber hue, Lena wonders if it's just her imagination. She brushes the thought aside, focusing instead on the familiar sounds of life around her, the chirping of birds, the distant hum of lawnmowers, and the occasional sound of a neighbor's voice drifting through the open windows. She wishes, for a moment, that everything was as perfect as it seemed. But deep down, she knows something is wrong. The cracks, though small, are beginning to show. Lena turns away from the window and walks over to the kitchen, where Daniel is sitting at the island, his back turned to her as he absent-mindedly scrolls through his phone. He looks up as she enters, his eyes dull and tired. "Hey," she says softly, her voice betraying a hint of hesitation. "How was work today?" He offers a half-hearted smile, his eyes drifting away from hers. "Same old," he mutters, his voice distant. "Busy. You know how it is." Lena nods, but the unease in her chest only tightens. She watches him for a moment, noting the way his fingers twitch as he grips his phone. It's a small thing, but it's the kind of detail she used to pick up on: his habits, his mannerisms, the way he always used to look at her when they spoke. Now, it's as if they're strangers living under the same roof. She wonders if he even notices. The silence between them stretches, an invisible weight hanging in the air. Lena shifts on her feet, gathering her courage. "You've been coming home late a lot," she says, her voice barely above a whisper. "Is everything okay?" For a moment, Daniel doesn't answer. He just stares at the screen of his phone, tapping idly at the surface. Lena feels her pulse quicken, her stomach tightening in anticipation. There's something off about him, something he's not saying. Finally, he looks up at her, his face a mask of exhaustion. "I'm fine, Lena." "Really? Just work, you know." But Lena doesn't buy it. She knows him too well. She can see the storm brewing just beneath the surface, the way he avoids her gaze, the way his shoulders are tense, like he's bracing for something. "Daniel," she presses, taking a step closer. "I don't know what's going on, but we need to talk. You've been different lately. Please, tell me what's going on." For the first time, she sees something flicker in his eyes, a flicker of something dark, something she can't quite place. His jaw tightens, and his eyes dart away from hers, as if trying to escape her gaze. "I said I'm fine," he repeats, his voice harder this time, defensive. Lena feels the sharp pang of frustration rising in her chest. She opens her mouth to speak, to push him further, but she stops herself. This isn't how she wanted it to go. She doesn't want to force him into a corner, doesn't want to create a rift that might never heal. She swallows hard, trying to keep her emotions in check, but the worry gnaws at her. Okay, she says softly, backing away, though her heart is pounding in her chest. Okay, but I'm here when you're ready to talk. Daniel doesn't respond. Instead, he stands up abruptly, brushing past her as he walks out of the kitchen. Lena stands there for a moment, the air thick with unsaid words, before she follows him to the living room. She watches him retreat into the den, his footsteps heavy, his demeanor stiff. She can feel it now, the distance. The invisible wall between them that grows taller by the day. She has no idea what's going on, but deep down, she knows this is just the beginning. The calm, peaceful facade of Riverside Hills may seem perfect to the outside world, but inside Lena's home, a storm is quietly brewing, one that threatens to shatter everything she thought she knew about the man she married. And somewhere, deep in the recesses of her mind, she fears that the worst is yet to come. The days that followed felt like a slow suffocation to Lena. Every glance at Daniel, every silence between them, grew heavier. The subtle shift in their relationship had transformed into an undeniable tension. It was as though they were living in parallel worlds, just inches apart, but miles away emotionally. Lena had tried to ignore it, to give Daniel space, but the gnawing feeling in her chest refused to go away. Each day seemed to mirror the last, Daniel coming home late, exhausted, his eyes distant, as though he were lost somewhere far beyond their home. And each night, Lena found herself lying awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind swirling with questions, doubts, and fears. Why had everything changed? What was he hiding? One evening, as the fading light of dusk streamed through the living room window, Lena stood at the kitchen counter, preparing dinner. Her movements were mechanical, almost robotic, as if her body was on autopilot, while her mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. She tried to shake off the nagging feeling that something was terribly wrong. Daniel's absence, once brief and casual, had stretched into longer hours. Tonight, he had come home later than usual, his tie loosened and his shoulders hunched, as though the weight of the world rested on him. She didn't say anything when he walked in, she just watched him, her heart pounding in her chest. He didn't seem to notice her gaze. His tired eyes scanned the room, his movements slow and deliberate, as if he were trying to avoid the reality of what was happening between them. He dropped his briefcase on the floor with a thud, not bothering to look at her as he walked to the fridge and grabbed a bottle of water. His silence was deafening. Lena cleared her throat. "Daniel," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need to talk." This time, Daniel didn't shrug her off with a simple excuse. He turned slowly, meeting her eyes, his face tense, almost resigned. "Lena," he began, his voice strained. "I've told you before, I'm fine." But Lena could see the cracks in his facade, the way he avoided her gaze, the tightness in his jaw. She knew there was more to it than just work stress, than just long hours and late nights. Something was wrong. And it wasn't just the silence, it was the way he was withdrawing from her, from their life, their marriage, everything they'd built together. "I don't believe you," Lena said, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and frustration. "I can see it, Daniel. You're not the same. And I need to know what's going on. Please, just tell me." Daniel sighed, rubbing his temples, as though the weight of her words was too much for him to bear. He took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling with the effort of trying to stay composed. "Lena," he started again, but there was a hesitation in his voice that spoke volumes. "I'm just tired," he said, his voice faltering. "Tired of all of this." Lena's heart skipped a beat. "Tired of what?" she asked, stepping closer to him. "Tired of me? Of us?" He looked at her, his eyes filled with something that almost resembled guilt, but also something else, something darker, something buried deep within him. Lena froze. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just about tiredness. It was more than that. He was hiding something, and it had been there all along, just beneath the surface, waiting to break free. "Daniel, please," Lena said softly, her voice now steady but filled with desperation. "I need to understand. What's really going on?" For a long moment, Daniel remained silent. His eyes were downcast, his body rigid, as though he were fighting a battle within himself. Lena could see the inner turmoil, the pain in his eyes, and it only made her more certain that there was something he wasn't telling her. Finally, Daniel spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not who you think I am, Lena," he said, his words a bombshell that exploded in the air between them. "I've been hiding who I really am for a long time now. I'm not the man you married." Lena felt as though the room was spinning, her breath catching in her throat. She blinked, trying to process what he had just said. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Daniel met her gaze, his eyes filled with pain, as though he were preparing for the worst. I'm transgender," he said, his voice breaking. "I've known it for a long time. But I've been too scared to tell you, scared to tell anyone." Lena stood there, frozen. The world seemed to stop around her, the words ringing in her ears like an endless echo. Transgender. Her mind raced to comprehend what Daniel had just confessed. The man she had married, the man she had shared a life with, was not the person she thought he was. She had known something was wrong, but this? This was beyond anything she had imagined. Her heart pounded in her chest as a wave of emotions crashed over her: confusion, betrayal, disbelief, and fear. She didn't know what to say, didn't know how to react. "I didn't want to hurt you," Daniel continued, his voice quivering with emotion. "I thought if I could just keep pretending, things would get better. But they didn't. And now I'm just lost. I don't know how to be myself anymore. And I don't know how to tell you the truth without losing you." Lena felt the weight of his words pressing down on her. She could hear the desperation in his voice, the pain in his eyes. She knew this wasn't easy for him. But the truth was a heavy burden to carry. She took a step back, her mind whirling, her heart torn between the love she still felt for him and the shock of what he had just revealed. Her world, the one she thought she understood, was falling apart before her eyes. She wanted to scream, to ask him 1,000 questions, but all she could manage was a quiet, broken whisper: "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Daniel's face crumpled as he collapsed into a chair, burying his face in his hands. "I was too scared," he said, his voice muffled. "Too scared of what you'd think. Too scared of what the world would think." Lena closed her eyes, her chest tight with emotion. She had spent years building a life with Daniel, but now, everything she thought she knew was crumbling. She didn't know how to fix this, if she could even fix it at all. The silence between them was suffocating. The secrets that had lingered for so long had finally come to light, and the future was now uncertain. Lena turned away, unable to look at him anymore. Her mind raced, her emotions torn in every direction. She didn't know what to feel, didn't know what to do. But one thing was clear: this was only the beginning. And the storm, it seemed, had only just begun. The days that followed Daniel's revelation were a blur of confusion, anger, and heartache. Lena couldn't escape the thoughts that kept racing through her mind, the questions that echoed louder than ever. How could she not have seen it? How long had Daniel been keeping this secret? And most of all, why hadn't he told her sooner? Their home, which had once felt like a sanctuary, now felt like a battleground. Every corner held memories of better times, moments of happiness and love that now seemed like distant echoes. The silence between them had become unbearable. Where there had once been easy conversations, laughter, and warmth, now there was only the heavy weight of unspoken words. Lena had retreated into herself, struggling to make sense of it all. She couldn't look at Daniel without feeling the sting of betrayal, and yet, she couldn't bear the thought of losing him either. The conflicting emotions tore at her, leaving her feeling helpless and lost. It was late one evening, after dinner, when the tension finally broke. Daniel had been quieter than usual, retreating into himself more and more. Lena could feel the distance between them stretching further, and though she tried to be patient, the silence became too much to bear. She needed answers, real answers, and she couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. She couldn't hold it in anymore. Daniel, Lena's voice was sharp, breaking through the thick silence that had settled over them. We need to talk. Now. Daniel looked up from his phone, his eyes flicking to hers before quickly looking away. He sighed heavily, his shoulders slumped with the weight of the conversation he knew was coming. Lena, we've talked enough, he muttered, his voice low. I've already told you everything. No, Lena's voice cracked with emotion. You've told me part of it, but I need more. I need to understand why you didn't tell me sooner. Why did you keep this from me for so long? Why did you let me build a life with someone who wasn't the man I thought he was? Daniel's face tightened, a flash of anger crossing his features. I didn't want to hurt you, he snapped. I didn't want to lose you. I thought if I could keep pretending, it would all work out. I was trying to protect us. Protect us? Lena echoed, incredulous. By lying to me? By pretending to be someone you're not? That's not protecting us, Daniel. That's betrayal. You kept me in the dark for years, and now everything's falling apart because of it. The room seemed to shrink around them as the weight of her words hit him. He stood up abruptly, pacing back and forth in frustration. You don't understand, he growled. It wasn't that simple. I've been living with this for so long, fighting against it every single day. I didn't know how to tell you, how to explain it. I didn't want to lose you, Lena. You're the one thing in my life that's been real. Tears welled in Lena's eyes as she shook her head. But I don't know who you are anymore, Daniel. The man I married, the man I thought I knew, was a lie. You were never that man. And now, I feel like I don't even know who you are. You've kept this from me, and now everything feels like it's been built on a lie. Daniel stopped pacing, his face contorted with guilt and frustration. I'm still the same person, Lena, he said, his voice softening. I'm still me. Just a version of me you didn't know about. I didn't want to lose you over this. I thought if I could just hold on for a little longer, things would get easier. But I was wrong. I should have told you earlier. I should have trusted you. Lena's heart wrenched at his words, but the hurt was too deep, the betrayal too raw. I don't know if I can forgive you for this, she whispered, her voice breaking. I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again. I feel like I've been living with a stranger. Daniel's face fell, and he collapsed back into the chair, his shoulders shaking with suppressed emotion. I'm sorry, Lena. I never meant for any of this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you. But I couldn't keep living a lie. The words hung in the air, suffocating them both. The truth had come crashing down between them, shattering everything they had built together. There was no going back now. The wall between them had been torn down, but in its place stood an even greater chasm, a chasm filled with anger, betrayal, and sadness. Lena took a step back, her mind reeling. She wanted to scream, to lash out at him, but she couldn't find the words. She had never felt more lost in her life. She had spent years loving a man who had been hiding his truth from her, and now that truth was laid bare, and it was more than she could bear. I need space, Lena finally said, her voice hoarse. I need to think. I can't do this right now. I can't even look at you right now. Daniel's face twisted in pain, but he said nothing. He knew she was right. She needed time, and so did he. The silence between them was unbearable, but neither of them had the strength to fill it. Lena turned and walked away, her heart heavy in her chest. As she made her way to the bedroom, she could feel the weight of the years they had spent together crashing down on her. What had they built? What was real? How could she ever trust him again? She lay in bed that night, staring up at the ceiling, but the darkness around her wasn't the comforting quiet of the night. It was the silence of a broken home, a broken marriage, and a broken heart. In the morning, when the light filtered through the blinds, nothing felt different. The world outside continued as if nothing had changed. But inside, the damage had already been done. Nothing would ever be the same again. Lena didn't know where to go from here. She didn't know if she could ever forgive Daniel. She didn't know if their love could survive this betrayal. And as she lay there, her thoughts swirling, she realized one thing: this wasn't just the end of their marriage. This was the beginning of a new, painful chapter, one filled with uncertainty, grief, and loss. The storm had come, and there was no telling how much more devastation it would bring. The days following their confrontation passed in a blur of tension, silence, and unspoken words. The house, once filled with laughter and the promise of a shared future, had become a hollow shell of what it once was. Lena moved through the motions of everyday life, but her heart was heavy with grief, anger, and confusion. Each time she looked at Daniel, she was reminded of the truth he had kept hidden from her, a truth that had shaken the very foundation of their marriage. Daniel, on the other hand, seemed like a man already lost. He had never felt more alone, more disconnected from the world around him. The woman he loved, the one person he had hoped would accept him for who he was, now looked at him with a mixture of hurt and distrust. His confession had done what he feared most: it had created an insurmountable distance between them. Every time their eyes met, he saw the pain he had caused, and it tore him apart. He had wanted to be honest, wanted to be free, but in doing so, he had lost everything he held dear. The silence between them grew unbearable, and yet neither one of them knew how to bridge the gap that had opened up between them. The words that once came so easily, the jokes, the quiet conversations, the shared hopes for the future, were gone. Instead, there was only the weight of the truth, a truth that both of them had to come to terms with, but in different ways. Lena had spent countless hours reflecting on the situation, torn between the woman she had always been and the woman she was becoming. She wanted to be angry with Daniel, to demand answers for the lies he had told her. She wanted to scream, to make him feel the hurt she felt. But there was another part of her, a part that still loved him, that wanted to understand why he had kept this secret for so long. She knew the road to forgiveness was long, but could she really forgive him? Could she ever look at him the same way again? For days, Lena had avoided speaking to him unless absolutely necessary. She had thrown herself into her work, focusing on the children she taught, trying to push the chaos of her personal life out of her mind, even if only for a few hours. But the moment she returned home, the reality of her broken marriage hit her like a wave, pulling her back under. One evening, after a particularly draining day, Lena found herself standing in the living room once more, her hands trembling as she stared at the empty space between her and Daniel. He was sitting on the couch, his back turned to her, his body language stiff and closed off. It was as if they were strangers living in the same house, and maybe they were. "Daniel," Lena said, her voice cracking with emotion. She had been holding back for so long, and now, in this moment, she couldn't keep it inside any longer. "I need to know, what do we do now? Where do we go from here?" Daniel didn't turn around immediately, as though he was afraid to face her. His silence stretched on, thick and heavy. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, he spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "I don't know, Lena. I really don't." Lena's heart ached at the hopelessness in his tone. She wanted to reach out to him, to hold him, but the distance between them felt too wide, too deep. She couldn't pretend everything was fine, couldn't pretend that they could just go back to the way things were. The betrayal, the years of lies, were too much for her to ignore. "Do you want to fix this?" Lena asked, her voice softer now, laced with vulnerability. "Do you want us to try?" Daniel's shoulders slumped, and for a moment, he didn't answer. Lena could see the struggle on his face, the internal battle between what he wanted and what he thought was possible. He had spent so long hiding who he truly was, and now that the truth was out, he didn't know if there was any way to make things right. "I don't know if I can fix this, Lena," he said, finally turning to face her. His eyes were filled with pain, and for the first time in what felt like ages, she saw the raw vulnerability he had kept hidden from her. "I've hurt you so much. I don't know how to make it right." Lena's heart twisted. She had always known him as the strong, confident man who would always have her back. But now, in front of her, was a man broken by his own fears, by the weight of the truth he had kept hidden. She didn't know if she could ever fully forgive him, the lies, the years of pretending, the feeling of betrayal, but she couldn't ignore the pain she saw in his eyes either. "Maybe I can't forgive you right now," Lena said, her voice trembling as tears welled up in her eyes. "But I need to try, Daniel. I need to know if we can even try to fix this. Can we try to rebuild what we had, or is it too late?" Daniel's face crumpled with the weight of her words, and he stood up slowly, walking towards her. There was a deep sadness in his eyes, but also a flicker of hope. It was a small light, but it was there. "I don't know," he whispered. "But I want to try. I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose us." Lena stood still, her heart racing as she searched his face for any sign of truth, any sign that he meant what he was saying. Could she do this? Could she let herself trust him again? The decision she faced was monumental, and she knew that whatever path she chose, it would change the course of their lives forever. The room was silent for a long moment, and in that silence, Lena realized something: she was at a crossroads. The future of their marriage, of their relationship, rested entirely in her hands. She had to decide if she was willing to forgive, if she could find a way to move forward, or if the weight of the lies and the betrayal was too much to overcome. "I don't know if I can forgive you yet, Daniel," she said quietly, her voice full of sorrow. "But I'm willing to try. I'm willing to figure out if there's a way for us to move forward. I'm willing to see if there's anything left to save." Daniel's eyes filled with tears, and he reached out to touch her arm gently. "I'll do whatever it takes, Lena. I'll prove to you that I'm still the man you married. I'll show you I'm worth fighting for." Lena nodded slowly, her heart torn between hope and fear. She didn't know if they could ever go back to what they were, but in that moment, she realized that she couldn't move forward without trying. There was too much love, too much history, too much shared pain to just let it all slip away. As Lena and Daniel stood in the quiet of their living room, neither of them knew what the future held, but one thing was certain: the road ahead would not be easy. But it was a road they would have to walk together, one painful step at a time. The storm had torn them apart, but maybe, just maybe, they could begin to rebuild. The days following Lena's decision to try and rebuild their marriage were filled with uneasy silence and fragile hope. The tension that had once gripped their home remained, but now it was laced with something else, an unspoken question that hung in the air like a storm cloud. Could they truly fix what had been broken? Could the wounds that had been carved into their relationship heal, or was it too late? Lena threw herself into the effort, determined to understand Daniel's struggles, determined to make this work. But the weight of what had happened was never far from her mind. Every conversation felt like walking on eggshells. Every gesture from Daniel was weighed with suspicion, and every attempt at normalcy felt like a fleeting moment that couldn't be trusted. They tried therapy. They tried communication. Lena even reached out to support groups for partners of transgender individuals, hoping to find a path that would lead them out of the darkness. But no matter how hard they tried, the reality of their situation was unavoidable. The damage had been done, and it couldn't be undone. One cold evening, as they sat together in the living room, Lena glanced at Daniel, his face illuminated by the dim light of the table lamp. He looked tired, exhausted, even, but there was a sense of relief in his eyes. He had been trying, really trying, to put the pieces back together. But Lena could see it in his face, too. The strain. The weight of their broken relationship pressing down on him, suffocating him in ways that neither of them could escape. Lena sat across from him, her fingers tracing the edge of a mug that had long since gone cold. Her mind was racing, torn between the love she still felt for him and the deep wound of betrayal that continued to ache in her heart. She had given him a chance, but the longer they tried, the clearer it became, there was a breaking point they had yet to reach. "I don't know if I can keep doing this," Lena finally whispered, breaking the silence that had enveloped them. Her voice trembled, raw with emotion. "I thought we could fix things. I really did. But I feel like I'm losing myself in this. I don't know how much more of this I can handle." Daniel's eyes filled with sorrow. He reached out to her, but Lena pulled back, instinctively. The distance between them felt too great, too wide to bridge with a simple touch. The pain they had both endured was too much to overcome in just a few weeks, and Lena felt it creeping back into her chest, heavy and suffocating. "I don't want to lose you," Daniel said, his voice breaking as he spoke. "I've already lost so much of myself, Lena. I thought I could do this, thought I could make this work. But I can see how much it's hurting you, and it's breaking me inside to know that I caused this pain." Tears welled up in Lena's eyes, and she bit her lip to keep the sobs at bay. She had tried to give him a chance, to understand him and to work through their problems. But it was too much. The years of lies, the hidden truth, the emotional distance between them, she couldn't carry it all anymore. The weight of their past was too heavy to bear. "Maybe this isn't meant to be," Lena whispered, more to herself than to Daniel. "Maybe I can't live with this. Maybe we both need to let go." For the first time in weeks, Daniel's face crumpled, his eyes brimming with tears. "Please, Lena," he pleaded, his voice desperate. "Please don't say that. I can't bear to lose you. I need you in my life. I'll do anything, I'll go back to therapy, I'll talk to someone. But please, don't walk away." But Lena already knew. She knew deep down that they had reached the end of their road. Their relationship had been built on a lie, and though she had tried to move past it, the truth was that the foundation had cracked beyond repair. She couldn't keep living in this constant state of pain, of mistrust, of confusion. "I don't think I can forgive you, Daniel," Lena said, her voice hoarse, the words feeling like a knife in her chest. "Not now, not after everything that's happened. And I don't think you can forgive me for staying. I don't think I can be the woman you need me to be anymore." The silence that followed was deafening. The air between them was thick with grief, regret, and loss. It felt like the world was collapsing in on them, a slow, suffocating collapse that neither of them could stop. Daniel didn't say anything. He couldn't. The finality of Lena's words had hit him like a freight train. He had known, deep down, that things were falling apart, but hearing her say it aloud felt like the last straw, the moment everything they had built together was destroyed. Lena stood up, her legs shaking as she walked toward the door. Daniel didn't move. He just sat there, his face buried in his hands, the weight of the situation settling on him like a crushing wave. He had caused this. He had ruined the one thing he had ever truly loved. "I'm sorry, Daniel," Lena said quietly, her voice breaking. "But this is over." She stepped outside, closing the door softly behind her, leaving Daniel alone in the dark, his heart heavy with the weight of everything they had lost. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. The house was empty, and so was Daniel's heart. He had tried. He had tried so hard to make it right, but in the end, it wasn't enough. The truth had come too late. The lies had buried him too deep. The weeks that followed were a blur of isolation. Daniel withdrew from his friends, from his family, from everything and everyone. He found himself trapped in the same cycle of regret and guilt, unable to escape the pain of what he had lost. He had hurt the one person who had meant everything to him, and now, she was gone. Lena, too, struggled with the aftermath of their failed marriage. She had loved him deeply, but the betrayal had left scars too deep to heal. She threw herself into her work, focusing on the children in her classroom, but the emptiness followed her, like a shadow she couldn't escape. The world seemed indifferent to their pain. Life went on for everyone else, but for Lena and Daniel, the world had stopped. The consequences of their choices, his secrets, her decision to stay, had left both of them shattered, pieces of a life they couldn't put back together. And yet, even in the depths of their pain, there was a lesson, a human lesson that neither of them could escape. The importance of honesty. The devastating effects of betrayal. The struggle to forgive. The toll that living in fear, in secrecy, could take on the soul. For Lena and Daniel, there was no happy ending. There was no redemption in this story, just a painful acknowledgement of what had been lost. But maybe, just maybe, the lesson would linger, for them, and for anyone else who had the courage to listen. The weeks after Lena and Daniel's separation were a blur of quiet sorrow and reluctant healing. Time, the great healer they say, moved slowly for both of them. For Lena, the pain of betrayal and the crushing weight of her decision to leave Daniel had left scars that would take years to fade, if ever. For Daniel, the loss of Lena, the love of his life, the one person he thought would never leave him, consumed him entirely. He had destroyed the one thing he cherished the most. Every morning felt like a struggle, a painful reminder of how deep his guilt ran. Lena, though heartbroken, found herself beginning to rebuild. Her work became her refuge, the only place where she could momentarily silence the voice of doubt and confusion in her head. Every day was an act of survival, pretending to be whole, while her heart slowly started to accept that she couldn't keep living in the past. She started going to therapy, taking steps to heal from the trauma of her broken marriage, slowly learning to forgive herself for staying as long as she did. Her therapist encouraged her to look at her future, to see the opportunities that lay ahead, beyond the pain. But forgiveness, she learned, was not a simple path. It wasn't just about letting go of Daniel's betrayal, it was about finding peace with herself. The person she had been before the truth had come to light, the naive, trusting woman, was gone. In her place was a woman who knew what it meant to fight for herself, to make hard choices, even if it meant losing someone she had once loved deeply. Daniel, meanwhile, sank deeper into isolation. He avoided friends, cancelled plans, and turned inward, consumed by guilt and regret. He spent hours reflecting on the life he had destroyed, the love he had pushed away. But unlike Lena, Daniel's path to redemption was uncertain. He wasn't sure how to begin the long road of healing when the person he most needed to understand him had walked out of his life. His own struggle was immense, perhaps even greater than Lena's. While she had made the choice to move forward, Daniel was stuck, paralyzed by the consequences of his actions. His therapy sessions were filled with questions, doubt, and deep sorrow. One day, months after their separation, Lena received a letter. It was from Daniel. She hadn't heard from him since they parted ways. The letter was long, filled with the pain and sorrow he had been carrying inside. But it wasn't just an apology. It was a plea for understanding, a final attempt at healing. He wrote about the shame he had felt throughout their marriage, the years of hiding his true self, and the fear of losing her. He acknowledged that the man he had been was not the man she needed, and that the relationship they once had been built on a lie, one that neither of them could have seen coming. Lena read the letter slowly, each word sinking deep into her heart. She could hear his voice in her head, feel the regret in his words. The familiar ache in her chest returned, but it wasn't just pain. It was something else, a sense of closure. She had wanted an apology, she had wanted to hear him acknowledge the hurt he caused. And now, she had it. But it didn't change anything. She still couldn't go back. She folded the letter carefully, placing it on her desk. Then, she sat back, taking a deep breath. She realized that while Daniel's letter might have brought some closure, it had also given her the final piece she needed, the understanding that her healing was her responsibility, not his. She couldn't fix him, just as he couldn't fix her. They were both broken, and the only way forward for each of them was to walk their separate paths. And so, Lena took another step toward rebuilding her life.